Thank you. I next want to introduce and turn the attention to David Larkin, who I mentioned before is an attorney based in Washington, D.C., specializes in issues related to international sport and anti-corruption. He's the co-director of the very first, or one of the very first, sport anti-corruption groups in the world, Change FIFA, and has twice run campaigns for the office of FIFA president. We are going to hear a lot about FIFA today, which should be emblematic in many ways of the issue itself as it relates to sports and corruption. Mr. Larkin.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to the American Bar Association. Thank you to you all for being here. In the United States, I think this is an incredibly and undervalued area of exploration for the American Bar Association. And I think it's a matter of national security for the United States, which I hope to outline very shortly. The first question is why does sport seem to perpetuate this corrupt environment? And if you examine it, it actually, the more you look at it, under this auspices of the autonomy of sport, it literally exists in a parallel universe. We, in modern democracies, are used to having accountability. We're used to having organizations that must report to authorities, that have reporting requirements, minimal disclosures. At international sport, we have none of that. So what exists in normal U.S. society, sport's in a whole other world. And so it's a black box. And so literally, this overlay of U.S. society is where all this corruption is bred. And because there's no transparency, because there's no accountability, because there's poor governance, poor justice, all of these things, this is why corruption keeps continuing to go on in this world. And what should alarm all of you is that this touches and affects U.S. sport, and it touches and affects U.S. athletes. They are victimized by this process, and it's getting worse. Now, the Olympic movement is comprised basically of three different parts. It's the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. It's the NOCs, which are your national Olympic committees, which is the U.S. National Olympic Committee and the various nations. And then it's we're going to use a term called IFs, which are international federations, which are the individual sports. Now, each of these international federations, say football, soccer, archery, there's sort of a pyramid to them, okay? So I used FIFA as an example. At the top is FIFA. Sort of in the middle are these pseudo entities that are really competition organizers but have political power, the regional confederations, and then there are member associations. Now, what you've got to understand, out of this structure, some really key things emerge if you study these things over years. That what we have in international sport would shock and alarm you in terms of the unsophisticated nature of the statutory schemes that are enacted to govern sport. As a lawyer, we're used to administrative codes. We're used to administrative law guiding the process by which we navigate fairness, due process, those sorts of things. They're all missing here. And because they're missing here, we have concepts of natural justice, which is basically do whatever you want. It's a discretionary type of legalese with no real accountability, no real protections of individuals. And in this world where there is no accountability, where there is no transparency, this corruption continues to persist. One of the most alarming things that we'll see is it goes all the way to the member associations. Some of the greatest corruptions that we've encountered is at the member association level. For example, I got into this field 6 years ago by accident, and it came with a phone call. And the phone call was as follows. Me and my friends would like to run for office in the National FA. There's only one problem, is the last people who took on the status quo were killed in a fake car accident. Will you help us? Corruption at the national level is pervasive. So is election fraud. And for those reasons, we continue to see the process by which people say, well, why is FIFA corrupt? Why is the IOC corrupt? And I would offer to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the corruption at the national level establishes the base upon which, the corrupt base upon which all of these organizations are founded. And until we address those issues, we're not going to make any progress. There's another issue I want you to understand. As Americans, it's incredibly important that you understand one concept. If you walk away with one concept today, I want you to walk away with this concept, that sport at the highest levels has nothing to do with sport. Sport, I mean, it's unbelievable, but it's true. Sport has nothing to do with sport at the international level. What does it have to do with? Geopolitics, okay? And you say to yourself, well, Dave, that seems very abstract. It's actually a very old game, okay? Understand the Olympic ideals. What are the Olympic ideals, right? So you read the Olympic Charter and you read some wonderful language, okay? And it says stuff like this. The goal of Olympism is to place sport at the service of the harmonious development of humankind. Sounds pretty good. With a view to promoting a peaceful society concerned with the preservation of human dignity. Again, that sounds great. Who doesn't want that? There's only one problem. There's very little reality to that. In the modern world, what we really see is this new game is actually an old game. I want you to think back to the 1936 Olympics and Adolf Hitler. What it was is that the Olympics were used to bring Germany back into the fold of nations in the wake of World War I. Okay, so this is not a new game. The new iteration of this is something we call soft power. Joseph Nye defined it the following way. In the old way is we'd really push sport in your face and use it as a propaganda tool. The new way is much more subtle. And what it is you get what you want by using attraction and persuasion rather than coercion, okay? So what happens is you set up a narrative about your country and then you sell it, okay? And through that attraction, therefore you get people to get on board with whatever your agenda is. That's the new game. And there's actually two versions of this. One that I call deceptive soft power and one that I call non-deceptive soft power. Deceptive soft power, I would offer, is where the narrative that you're sold is inconsistent with domestic reality for that country, okay? So for example, we love sport. Reality at home, they don't love sport. Reality, we love sport for the furtherment of humankind. At home, they don't care about human beings. There's no preservation of human dignity. That's a game that's going on as well, and you've got to be sharp to it. So, sport is a fantastic tool of soft power. Think about it. It creates a shared experience. It creates everybody wants to be a winner. Everybody wants to get on board. It's an incredibly powerful vehicle to attract. Hey, look at this. What is this? This is the Sochi Olympics. Let's talk. So who are the big players in the space right now? The masters of this craft are Russia. Okay? Nobody's better. Nobody's more sophisticated. They play on an entirely different plane than everybody else. But who are the others? So first of all, well, let me look at this. This is what Karen Duisha said. She's a Soviet studies specialist. And here you can see, I mean, what we all know, that sport is about selling an image. Get on board. We're good. We're better. And Russia's interesting because they use sport for domestic consumption. But there's an incredibly new and different player called Qatar. And Qatar are doing a new game. They're not using it just for domestic consumption. They're using it proactively for international intervention, okay? And in the United States, I would offer that the greatest concern you should have is Qatar, because they're here, and in my opinion, they're using sport for geopolitical purposes within the continental United States, and there's no doubt in my mind about that. The other players are China, okay? And then let's talk, so China is kind of new, and they're getting on board, and they're getting better. The last player is the United States, and how does the United States do in this game? There's no one more clueless about soft power and geopolitics and sport than the United States of America. No one has more, is worse at this game than the United States. In the United States, let me be specific. You should be alarmed about what Qatar is doing within the continental United States because there's some curious entities at work funded by Qatar at work here. And I see it in Washington, D.C. all the time. There's some very curious things that have happened, whether it be Doha goals in coordination with the Paralympics last year that was fronted by Michael Phelps and Jason Collins. The most curious entity to me that I have lots of questions about is what is, per Reuters, the 70% Qatar-funded International Center for Sport Security. It is an incredibly bizarre organization whose roots you can trace back through a book called The Ugly Game. And if you've observed them like I have for the last 3-4 years, there's literally zero daylight between them and Qatar's national strategy of using sport for geopolitical aims. I can find no daylight between them at all. What should alarm you is that they're here. And they're not just here talking about the universal values of sport. And remember that everybody says the same things about sport, that it's what we just love sport, we love human rights, we love all these things. And I personally would characterize Qatar as a deceptive soft power nation because what they sell abroad and what they sell at home I find to be inconsistent, especially when a country of 350,000 nationals has 1.2 million people in what Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International characterizes as modern slavery. Okay? So, soft power is about getting what you want, and that should alarm you. So let's talk about the sport justice system. The other important message I bring today is that the sport justice system, and this is where the ABA could play such an important role. I'm here to tell you that the international sport justice system is unbelievably broken. It's not able to keep sport clean. If you examine, so this is the entity. So we as Americans, on the international level, we're too nice. Sometimes we're too brash and we assume too much and we think we know too much. In the context of international sport justice, I'm here to tell you that it's time for the United States to be much more active. We as American lawyers, if I were to place you in the context of international justice in sport, you would be shocked and alarmed at the lack of due process, the lack of individual protections. You just simply wouldn't believe what's allowed to go on. And I would urge the ABA to take this on as an issue going forward for that reason. This entity sounds great. It's a European entity. But there's only one problem. It's chock full of conflicts. The people who run sport stack this organization with basically people who they all know. As an athlete who is trying to get a fair shake, I would offer that your chances are diminished by the perceived and or real conflicts that this pseudo court has in administering justice. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it gets it wrong, but the structure of the court itself clearly has conflicts. And it's nothing that we in Western law would ever tolerate, and we shouldn't tolerate. The other problem is that this entity is mediocre, as Pechstein illustrated. It's mediocre Western and first world justice. There's only one problem. If you go into the third world, the structure of justice offered by the pseudo-judicial body is in essence unavailable. I would argue that this entity and the third world is completely inaccessible for a number of reasons. Financial, structure, language, fees, everything. And so what you see, we've been out working in the third world now for 5 years. I have yet to find a case where I can get to this entity in good conscience for a number of reasons. And you'll say, Dave, there's legal aid. This entity offers legal aid, so why don't you exploit that? Why don't you use that? I'll tell you because it's arbitrary and it's unpredictable. So if you're a person in the third world, you have to come with $1,000 Swiss francs to even get here. And then you bear the burden of the finances falling on you. If you're fighting just a pure equitable battle about right and wrong with no finances available or no financial penalty perhaps in play, You still worry about administrative costs and other costs. But again, and then you say, well, Dave, then why don't they do that? Because the legal aid that they offer is arbitrary. You don't know if you're going to get it or not. And if you don't get it, you got to come up with airfare, translators, and all these other things. So this is why. And remember the pyramid? And I told you that at the national level, we have a huge corruption problem. The unavailability of this entity and what I would offer are clear conflicts of interest means that at the bottom level, in the third world, sport has no ability to keep clean. As we've all seen, self-regulation of all of these entities simply doesn't work. We've seen the iteration. We've been promised self-reform. We went from no ethics code at FIFA, for example. We had no ethics code, then we had a terrible ethics code, then we had a bad ethics code, then we had a okay ethics code, and that's where we are. But when you look at self-regulation of sport under the auspices of autonomy of sport, it's nothing more than a vain exercise in which these entities and the people who control these entities always fall short of providing objective and fair justice. So in summary, I would just say this, that the United States has got to wake up to a new reality, that sport has nothing to do with sport, and that to ignore this is to not only imperil themselves, the sport industry in the United States and U.S. athletes, and subject them to this broken system, but I would also offer that when you have a foreign-funded governments coming to the United States, foreign government-funded entities coming to the United States, you should ask some very serious questions about what they're up to and what they're doing. I would also offer that as all these entities are essentially publicly funded, you look at the Brazil World Cup, all of our societies fund these organizations. We provide the infrastructure off of which they nationalize the costs and they privatize the profits. We must demand a new deal with international sport, and it is incumbent upon the United States to lead on this. We also must, and I would, again, the American Bar Association could do so much here, we must fix the international justice system so that people in the third world, the first world, the second world, everybody has an opportunity to be heard and corruption addressed and election fraud fixed. And until we get there, sport will forever be corrupt. And I would lastly offer that we got to also be very, very careful about what is now being sold as reform. This entity that I talked to you about, called the International Center for Sport Security, offers itself as a sport integrity outfit. Yet it is 70% funded by Qatar. What, ladies and gentlemen, are they up to? That is the question.